Hello, everybody, and thank you for having me here. I see a couple of familiar faces. Today, I want to talk about messaging to developers, which messaging is a huge part of the product marketing function and role, but messaging to developers and the developer audiences overall are wholly different than pretty much every other audience that you'll try to target. All right, so about me. I have been in marketing for the better part of 20 years. In my brain, I'm 25 years old. A large part of that has been focusing on developer audiences all the way back to Install Shield and Install Anywhere. Raise your hand if you've ever heard of that. It's the little thing that used to pop up when you wanted to install like BlackBerry software on a Windows machine ages ago. All the way through to early 2000s when I worked for a company that pioneered and was a catalyst of agile software development. It became very clear that developers were not like decision makers. They weren't like VPs or anything else. So I put a lot of study and research and observation into understanding developer audiences. So before I go any further, how many of you in here have to target, or there's some part of your role that needs to focus on developer audiences? Okay, cool. All right. So the thing to know about developers is developers have power. We tend to think of them as long tail, like the end of the buying cycle, but that's not the case. A wise man once told me that developers can't make an enterprise deal, but they can break one. You can have a CIO that thinks this is the most awesome software, awesome SaaS product under the sun. But then when he hands it off to his developer teams, they're like, oh no, this is terrible, I hate it, we're not gonna use it, everybody quits. Like, that's not a good scenario, right? You also can't rely on sales, because salespeople, you love salespeople, you really do. But salespeople will tell a VP, yeah, this SaaS product will start your car, it'll mow your lawn, all of that. When in reality, it doesn't. So it's up to you, the product marketers, to make sure that the messages are correct for your developer audiences, okay? What did I do? Okay, there we go. Technology. All right. So like I said, marketing to developers is wholly different, and understanding what makes them unique is essential. You don't have to be a developer to market to developer audiences. I'm not. Like the last time I wrote code, I cried. But you have to understand how to reach them, how to make your message resonate, how to create that credibility, and how to deliver it, which is what we're going to talk about today. What's your message? What are you telling them? What do you need to tell them in order to gain the credibility, like I said? Who's your messenger? Now, we're all in marketing. We like to say that everyone in the company is a messenger. Yeah. The reality is, for developers, you need to be a lot more purposeful and pragmatic about who's delivering those messages to those audiences. And then, how's your delivery? You'll learn, and what I'll show you is that there's a unique channel mix, unique media for developers that you can tap into. Some of these you may not have ever thought of. All right, so first thing about messaging for developers. They do not care about your brand message. They don't want anything with jargon. They really do not care about your corporate pitches. So product line, competitive advantages, shareholder, like they don't care about any of that. They care about what's going to make their everyday life easier. And it might sound tactical, but the truth is, whatever you're pitching to them, whatever you're selling to them, whatever you're messaging to them, has to go right to the heart of why they should care. So it's not fluffy. It's direct, it's straight to the point, and it tells them, this will make your life better because of A, B, and C. That's it. It's very simple. Developers like to be educated and informed, so they like to learn new things. They like to be challenged, and they also want to know what's going to work. Okay, so what's your message? I think a lot of people have seen the developer journey map. So this was started years ago by a company called, I think DevRel Book is the name, and this is just a high level of what the developer journey looks like. As you can see, it starts with some goals and needs and some questions. And this is okay, it's a starting point, but I like to use the entire developer journey. And I base this off of the pirate model, which is like ARG, right? Sounds like a pirate. I'm not going to do that sound because I'm not going to embarrass myself. But this is a bit more detailed when it comes to all of the points, all of the sort of avenues and lanes when the developer goes through your product process, your marketing process. You start with their needs and messages, and then down here we talk about tactics and strategies, right? So like anything else, developers automatically want to know, or when they go looking for you, they have a problem, whatever that problem is. I have a problem, I need a solution. What's out there? What are other developers saying? What are they doing? What are they using? The thing to know about developers is that they're very community focused. So instead of going to, it's kind of like when you shop for something on Amazon, right? It looks great, you automatically go to the reviews. I bought this air fryer and it blew up. Like when you see stuff like that, you're like, yeah, maybe I don't need that. What's the thing on the show where the crock pot like burned up something? Like you don't want that, right? That's exactly what developers do. They go, they find, when they need a solution, they go to the community. There's a number of communities out there. They look for reviews and feed off of and make decisions whether they're testing something, they're downloading, they're trialing a product based on what those reviews are, right? Acquisition, so you got your developer, right? They came, they signed up for your free trial, your freemium, whatever your product is. You have to answer the question of, is this what I need? Like, I signed up for it, but is this really right? Does this integrate with the things that I need it to integrate with? Is it gonna be easy to use? Again, as product marketers, you have to message across this whole thing and answer all of these questions, including hands-on experiences, which can be trials, tutorials, hackathons, code jams, things like that, right? And then once your developer comes in, they've done the trial, you want to activate them, you want to keep them, activation and retention. So what can I do quickly? Getting them up and running. What are others doing? Again, developers are very community focused. So they ask the questions of others, what did you do with this particular product? Or what did you do with this solution? And how do I do the same thing? Or how do I do something better? Product roadmaps, talking about integration. So sometimes these can be open source, these can be competitors, but developers need to understand how to best use all of the things that your product does. Referral and revenue and products. So this is, you've got them, you want to move them from a freemium, you want to move them from a trial, you want them to become unofficial spokespeople. You want them to be in those communities sharing their experiences, sharing their ideas. Because again, other developers, when they're coming to use your products, this is where they're going to go. This is what they want to hear. Okay. So content is the message. For developers, you want to develop your messages and your content based on data, right? So you can do any number of language analysis, site scraping to see what they're talking about in these different communities. What are they talking about on competitor websites? And be precise about the topics and the language. So understand what they're talking about and speak to it. Again, getting away from jargon, getting away from fluff, getting away from things that kind of work with decision maker audiences. Remember, these guys are really pragmatic, so they want it direct and to the point, nothing fluffy. And when we talk about content, text content works, obviously, but also think of videos, and not necessarily 30-minute webinars. You can go with 3-minute videos that talk about, okay, here's how we do this, this, and this, and here's what this product does. Keep it short because they don't have a lot of time. Convey the immediate value, what the results will be, what will they get from it. Again, staying away from fluff. And always remember with developers, you have to be credible. It has to do what you say it does when you say it does it. Developers can be relentless and critical, So if they have a negative experience, they're going to share that negative experience, and that's going to impact your users, your bottom line. Okay? Going back. So when I talk about knowing your audience and dissecting it, developers come in more flavors than Baskin-Robbins, right? And you have to understand that. You can slice and dice your audience any number of ways, right? I know this is kind of hard, but these are developer, backend, full stack, designer, DevOps specialists. On this side, breaking them down by the languages or the technologies that they use. Not necessarily by industry, because I don't know very many developers that think of themselves as a banking developer, right? They think of themselves as front end, back end, et cetera. But when we talk about knowing your audience, understand how they think of themselves, not how you think of them, how they think of themselves, and then speak to that. Understand the language that goes into all of the different facets of your targets. All right, who's the messenger? Again, in marketing, we want everyone in the company to be a messenger, to be an advocate. Doesn't always work, especially with developers. With every developer and developer audiences, credibility is key. And whoever you're using as your advocates, as your voice, has to be knowledgeable. They have to be trustworthy. They can't just say, yeah, I know how to code in Java. I need to know what that looks like. What's that person's online profile? Where are they on GitHub? Where are they on Twitter? Where are they on Reddit? Any number of different things. But they have to be objective and honest, okay? Verifiable experts. They need to be able to talk the talk and really mean it, really understand it, and be able to take the technical terminology and convey that into value. So like I said, you, as a product marketer, don't necessarily need to be a developer, but you need to understand it, and you need to have people that can convey the messages you create and translate them into developer speak. And be accessible. This is important. It's one thing to post a message on Twitter. It's another thing to have an evangelist or your messengers be engaged and have a back and forth, have the two-way communication that will bring in your developer and your technical audiences, get them to have conversations, because not only does that help your audience become more comfortable with your products, it also gives you feedback of what's going on in the market, because we're always listening, we're always trying to find the competitive advantage, use cases, et cetera. Okay, so identifying messengers. Like I said, not everybody can do this. Internally, companies have developer advocates and evangelists. These are developers, essentially, that have learned to go out and be basically your mouthpiece. But don't stop there, because you have product owners, product engineers that are experts at the product. Do not keep them from speaking or writing, creating content. They can be fantastic, wonderful resources, and they can back up your evangelist teams. You can also learn from them. So as you're trying to understand the market, you're trying to understand your targets, you're trying to understand the language, tap into your internal teams. They know a lot. External, influencers. And I know influencers is kind of a grimy word, especially when we think about like Instagram. But there are influencers out there in the tech space that people listen to. There's Jez Humble. There's Kelsey, I forgot his last name, he works for Google. But a lot of people follow what they say and they listen. And there's nothing wrong with engaging them to help further your message, to help build your audience. User groups and communities. Like I said, developers are very community focused. So there are in-person and online groups and communities where they meet, they discuss, they learn from each other. Leverage them, talk to them. Of course, customers, we all want to build those wonderful customer case stories, those use cases. They can be fantastic evangelists and messengers for you. Anybody but an analyst. Developers tend to think that analysts are idiots. Sometimes they are, not always, sometimes. But Analysts tend to focus at the executive level, right? They tend to think in these big terms, and that's, again, not what developers want. They want to hear from someone that can talk to them, get deep down into the dirty code, and answer questions. Typically, analysts can't do that, so developers don't find a lot of credibility with analysts. Okay, finally, how's your delivery? Granted, many of us are not necessarily in the demand gen, and we're not necessarily responsible for putting the messages out there and putting your campaigns out there. But it's important to understand how developers get their information, where they get it from, and how they consume it, and what's most trustworthy, because that sort of shapes your message, right? All right, places that they go for information. Traditional outdoor media, sometimes you do billboards. I've worked for a company before, we did billboards. Tech-focused media, I have a whole list, and it's not even an exhaustive list of developer and tech-focused websites and blogs and content generators that you wouldn't necessarily employ for decision-maker audiences. Like I said before, online and in-person communities. These are great because developers come together, they feed off of each other, and these can be perfect spots for employing your messengers to go out and tell the story, okay? Social media and YouTube. Traditional, everybody kind of understands that. Non-traditional, product review sites, like G2 Crowd, for example. Again, this is like an Amazon where everyone goes to get information, to discuss solutions, to understand experiences, et cetera. You want to employ those. Slack channels. This is one not a lot of people think of, but Slack channels are an online community where people go to ask a quick question, where they go to explain or discuss their experiences. A lot of companies tend to ignore these, and yeah, they can be a little bit to manage. They can be a little bit complex to manage, but once you've built the community kind of takes care of itself. Again, this is a great place for you to not only put out your messages, but for you to learn about what's going on within your audiences. What are they talking about? What are their problems? What are their questions? This helps you with everything down the road, right? Helps you with messaging, helps you with documentation, with advertising, everything. WhatsApp communities kind of works the same way as Slack channels. Podcast, again, you might not necessarily do podcasts for a C-level executive team, but for developers, it works. I didn't think it would, but it actually works. And it's not a matter of starting your own podcast for the company because, like, who's following that? But this goes back to the influencers, right? Influencers have their podcasts, they have their audiences, they've been established for years. There's nothing stopping you from leveraging them, engaging with them to get your message out there. Again, another way of learning. So everything, when we talk about delivery, not only are these great for putting your own messages out there, but it's also great for learning, right? For understanding the language, the topics, the issues within your developer audiences. And then Twitch, okay. Twitch is a gamer platform, which I'm not a gamer, but it's a big gamer platform. But there are studies that show there's a great overlap between gamers and developers. So using Twitch as another form of another channel works. Takes a little while to build up your audience, but it can work for live coding sessions, for another form of webinars. If someone wants to do like a live coding session, a webinar, education, whatever, Twitch is a great place to gain an audience and to engage with your audience. And then open source repositories. Again, it's like an Amazon. Stuff in there is free. Developers go there to find solutions, especially when they don't have buying power within their companies. Not only are they there for the free software, let's say you have a freemium product that's not open source, it's a good place to demonstrate how open source solutions can integrate with what you're offering, right? It's a great way to show developers that you understand, that your company, your solution understands their pain, and you are willing to, or you're able to adapt to what they need. Because a lot of developers out there will find their own solutions through open source platforms, different open source solutions, but they have to integrate it with stuff that they already have, or they have to integrate it with a new tool. This is not even an exhaustive list of developer media sites, but these are places that I've personally engaged with on some level to target and to reach and to understand developer and technical audiences. And again, wouldn't necessarily use these for decision makers, but these are great for developers, technologists, end users, depending on what your product is. And it's always evolving. All right, I came in at 20 minutes. Questions?
Questions from the audience? Slido going as well?
Okay, how do you build a developer community? Couple of things. Yes, you start by meeting them where they are. So you find them in any of the communities, and then you start to build your persona, build your position there. So you set up your company, you set up your evangelists to create their persona, their presence, and then from there, engaging throughout the audiences, or throughout the community. Now, it takes time. This is not the kind of thing where you throw an evangelist into G2 Crowd and automatically they have a lot of followers and a lot of discussion. It takes time, just like any other audience build. It takes time, but the more credibility you have as a company and your messengers, the more credibility you have, the better your products are, the better engagement you have throughout the community, the stronger and the faster you will be able to build your company's community. Yeah.
Andy, I have a quick question for you. When you think about developing those relationships with the community or just even getting feedback, what are some ways that you practice? And we heard empathy is really important in those soft skills. What are some ways you practice that in order to build that trust? Because this is also an audience that doesn't have a lot of trust until you earn it.
Absolutely. So ways to build trust. We talked about that Slack channel. Someone comes to your Slack channel and they have a serious problem. Answering them, engaging with them, builds that credibility because it shows that you're listening and you're willing to learn. Engaging with them at events, coming to where they are. So paying attention to the feedback that you're getting on these peer review sites, right? And giving feedback. Asking your developers, giving them an easy channel to give you feedback. So let's say you have a SaaS product. Within your SaaS product, you probably have a product, you probably have a solution where they can message you, right? Something like Drift or Pendo, that sort of thing, inside the message. Giving them every opportunity and multiple ways to ask questions, to gauge your involvement with them builds that credibility.
Makes sense. I think I saw a question back there. If you just don't mind repeating the question when we hear it.
So you have this community established, right? You said it takes
So there's a few solutions out there that sort of scrape these communities looking for trends and keywords, things like that. Paying close attention and then getting to the heart of what those issues are. Sometimes it's a matter of addressing the person directly, saying, and it could be, it doesn't have to be public. It can be a DM to whoever gave you the review to say, okay, talk to us, tell us what happened, tell us what went wrong. It can be personal, right? And it can be, like I said, a bit cumbersome and detailed, but in order to make your audience comfortable, you have to be willing to engage. And that, again, this is why you want to have numerous messengers, because not one team can usually handle all that. So this is where you bring in like your customer success folks. This is where you bring in your product folks, because what I've witnessed is that when someone is giving you a bad review, it's because they don't know how to use something. They don't know how something works, right? Or how to find something. So it can be resolved just by someone paying attention and saying, hey, what's your problem? And then resolving it. And then from there, okay, so you have this personal exchange, whether it's like a quick Zoom call or whatever to understand this person's issue, then make sure that you go back to the community publicly and address it. So it's not necessarily like you address this specific person, but in your messaging, in your profile, you answer these specific problems so that when another developer comes to your site with this issue, they can already see that it's been resolved and that your company cares enough to pay attention to them.
Another question up there that I think is a great one on G2. I think a lot of us have probably looked at G2, looked at it for different strategies. I think there's a lot of really greatness in that, platform. What do you think about pricing, being transparent there, or some best practices that you've seen in G2?
Yeah, you want to be as transparent as possible. Developers come to expect enterprise pricing to be the kind of thing we have to talk to sales. But remember, developers do not want to talk to sales unless they absolutely have to. Like they don't want to receive phone calls. They don't want like the weird email messages. Hey, I'm Steve and I'm your sales guy. Like they don't want that. They want to be able to serve themselves as much as possible, because also remember, developers don't necessarily do the 8 to 5, okay? You have developers on the other side of the world. They don't want to wait for an answer. They don't want to wait to figure out whether they can afford this or not. So I recommend being as transparent as possible, because right away that tells them whether or not they can afford and use your product. It saves them frustration, because if they have to search for it, they will lose interest and move on to something else.
Any from the audience, so that we can hit slide O? A question here about prioritization. How do you prioritize your message and marketing weight to developers over other buyers and stakeholders? Great question.
Good question. So I like to employ, depending on the solution, I like to employ a top-down, bottom-up, right? Top-down are your decision makers, right? So there's the messages there. The bottom-up are your developers, and you want to be telling essentially the same story from both ends of the funnel, I guess. You want to be telling the same story, but in a way that resonates, okay? If a significant part of your revenue is developer driven, subscription-based, SaaS, whatever, you want to put a significant focus on your developer messaging, because again, they can move quickly. Many of them have some level of buying authority, and they don't necessarily have to engage anyone else for approval. So it really depends on what your product is and what your ultimate goals are. But you can put a heavy focus on developer messaging in order to engage these audiences, because they can be a bit more challenging, but they can also be very productive and fruitful.
All right. Yeah, well, go ahead. We got one more in the audience here.
Yeah. Hi.
So just building on that.
Okay. So here's how I would frame the scenario. So let's say I'm Siemens, or I have developers from Siemens, right? And they're using my freemium product. Freemium maxes out at, let's say, 500,000 API calls a month. As they approach that threshold, so let's say they get to 400, and that's pretty consistent, two things should be happening in marketing. One, we should be seeking out the decision makers within the company to let them know, hey, you know, your developers have been using our stuff. They've obviously been pretty successful with it. Let's talk about scaling up. For developers within that part of the marketing campaign, they should be receiving messages within the product, as well as through maybe email and other channels, saying, hey, you're about to hit your threshold. Let's talk about what we can do to move you over to an enterprise account. It's kind of like if you were to buy Smartsheet, right? You can get a Smartsheet license. Everybody knows what Smartsheet is? All right, great. You can get a Smartsheet license for 10 people yourself, self-serve. But if you want it for your entire organization, 1,000 people, you know you have to talk to enterprise. You know you have to talk to sales about an enterprise license. And I think developers have come to recognize that as well. They know that at a small scale, they can do much of what they want to do, or they expect to be able to do much of what they want to do in a self-serve manner, versus when they get to scale and they have to add more licenses, or it's complex licensing, they understand that they will need to talk to sales. That's not their go-to, that's not what they want to do. But when they get to a point where they know they have to, it's acceptable.
Sounds good. Well, Danny, I think that was all the time we have for questions. So thank you for everything. Appreciate it.
Thank you.